My name is Cesar Marani, and I am a photojournalist by occupation and by passion. I'll give you a short bio of myself because that's what he asked for. I was born in St. Louis, moved to Southern Illinois pre-kindergarten. I call my hometown Waltonville because I moved there in grade school, went to high school there. Sports-wise, I played baseball for 4 years. That was my sport. There really wasn't much room in the starting lineup of basketball for a 5'6", 123-pound guard that didn't have the skills of a Johnny Dressler and some of the Haley boys that came along later. But anyway, that was my sport, and I loved it, and do to continue this day. But Waltonville was also a really good town for supporting their sports and basketball when I grew up. I went to SIU. After high school, I was going to join the Illinois National Guard to get a scholarship so I could go to SIU. But fortunately, the person ahead of me that had a chance to get a teacher scholarship to SIU passed on it, and in class rank, I was next. So, instead of ending up in the National Guard and perhaps Vietnam, which I was willing to do, I ended up going to SIU on a teaching scholarship. I wanted to be an educator anyway, that's what my goal was. And fortunately, my education was paid for because I committed to be a teacher. So I became a public school teacher. I basically got into photography and sports in the early 70s. I had taught school in Streator, Illinois for 1 year, right out of college in 66. From there, I moved to Murfreesboro, where I taught 2 years. And after that, I had a chance to take a job in Cesar-Valier, where I became a public school teacher for the next 6 years in a self-contained 5th grade classroom. It was during that time that I was introduced to photography, and my first year in Benton, I noticed in the Benton paper they did not have a lot of photographs, and I had just taken up photography. So that first year that we lived there, 1969 through 70, that winter they had a terrible blizzard. It shut down the interstate for a little while. So I went to the newspaper, the Benton Evening News, and I introduced myself to the editor, and I said, could you use a couple of photographs of this storm for your newspaper? And he said, yeah, go out there and see what you can come up with. So I did. And I shot various things around town. This was the beginning of my photojournalism career. The reason I go into detail on this, it's very important. The editor of that newspaper was Jim Soldier, and the Soldier family owned it. As often is the case in small-town newspapers, it was family-owned. And that's a big difference, as many of you my age know, from something being corporate-owned. I went around town, took some photographs, went home. I told my wife, if you need to use a bathroom, use it now, because I'm going to shut that door, I'm going to set the enlarger up on the stool, and I'm going to give a couple of quick proof prints out here. So I did that. About an hour later, I went back to the Benton Evening News, asked for the editor, Mr. Soldier. A nice young lady took me back to his office, and I laid out 2 little 5x7-inch sheets, contact sheets, and I know Chuck and many of you who are listening to me might know what those are, but they are basically little small photographs made from the strip of negatives that they can see what I shot. So Mr. Soldier looked at them, took out a red magic marker, a red grease pencil. He circled 7 photographs. He says, I'll pay you $5 each for those. You can get them back here in an hour and a half. So I went home and knocked the photographs out, took them back up there. There I had my first money, sold my first photographs. I thought, hey, this is fun. So that's how I got started as a photojournalist. Well, it turns out that Mr. Soldier asked me the next week or two, he said, you know, basketball is big around here. And Rich Herron is always bugging me about more publicity. He said, would you be willing to take photographs at Benton Ranger games? I said, I think I could try that. So that was the beginning of my career as a sports photographer for newspapers and magazines. And fortunately, under the great coach Rich Herron, they had some terrific basketball teams back then. So basically, I covered the Benton Rangers from 1970 through 1975 when I became a full-time photojournalist and writer with them and left education after 9 years. And I covered the Benton Rangers until I left in 1987 to work for the Odessa American in Odessa, Texas. That happened when the Soldier family sold the newspaper and positions got realigned, and so I took a job where I could still continue to be a photojournalist, and that's what my passion was. And I took it in West Texas, left my wife and son behind in Benton, Illinois. He had 6 months before we graduated from Benton High School. They joined me later, and after a year and a half in Odessa, Texas, I came back to Southern Illinois to take a job at the Southern Illinoisan, where the great photo editor Dick Carter had an opening and called me in Texas, and I took him up on the job. And that's where I ended up retiring out of after 18 and a half years. And right about the same time, Jim Muir, who had also worked alongside me at the Southern Illinoisan, was in a different phase of his career. And he and I talked, and he thought there was a great need, and I agreed, for a sports magazine in Southern Illinois. So he came up with the name Southern Illinois Sports Connection. And for the next 3 years or so, he published a magazine that featured stories, photographs, historical tidbits, and just about anything you could think of regarding sports in Southern Illinois. Now, I was fortunate enough to be a columnist for that news magazine, in addition to taking photographs for feature stories. I actually wrote a column. I called it In Focus, if I'm not mistaken, and because of the photography angle. But what I did in almost every column for that on a monthly basis for the over 3 years or so the magazine published, I would take a old black and white photograph that I had taken during the 70s or 80s earlier in my career, and I would write a column about my experience taking that photograph or about the people who were in it. I did columns on everything from Minnesota Fats, the great pool player, who lived in Dowell, Illinois, which was here in Southern Illinois. I had photographed Fats on several occasions, so to write this column and an update on it, I went to Dowell, Illinois, found the home he had lived in, talked to people who knew him and his late wife, and I wrote a column. But basically that's what I did. I tried to highlight the past. And this museum that is going to be put in Northern Illinois, it looks like, here in the near future, the Illinois Basketball Museum, is going to highlight what I feel has been neglected for a long time in historical places, and that's small-town sports throughout the state, and basketball in particular. So basically that brings you to where I'm at today. I am now retired from full-time newspaper work 11 years. I retired out of the Southern Illinoisan. And for the last 11 years, for the first 3.5 years, Jim and I and Tom Wheeler and others contributed and put together the Southern Illinois Sports Connection magazine. Then when that ended, ceased publication, I approached the Marion Republican, where I live now in Marion. I've lived there 30 years after I came back from Texas. I said, would you be interested in feature stories and photographs that I come across on weekends or whenever? They said, sure. So since then, for the past 8 or 7 or 9 years now, I've been doing freelance work for primarily for the Marion Republican, for the Benton Evening News, for the DuQuoin Call, for the Harrisburg Register. When I run across something that I think is a great little feature or a feature photo, I take it, I interview it, I'm a storyteller, basically. I should have said that in the beginning. Anybody who's a journalist, if they're worth their salt at all, they tell a story. They don't just share an event, they tell a story. And I've always taken great pride in the fact that in my photographs I want to tell a story, and also in words. You tell people stories. Lecturing once to a college journalism class, I was asked, well, how do you come up with all these things? You depend on an editor or whatever? I said, no. I said, I don't care whether you're working in Chicago for the Tribune or whether you're working for the Harrisburg Register in Harrisburg, Illinois. Each town, let's say Benton, for example, has 6,000 people. There's 6,000 stories right there. Everybody has a story. And it's up to your job as a journalist to find out what their story is and to tell it in a way that both honors them but also enlightens your readers. It's always been my philosophy. whether it's writing or whether it's using the camera. I like to tell a story that enlightens, entertains, and enhances the life of the person reading it or viewing it. So basically, that's the nutshell of me and my life. And I've been blessed in the years I've worked in sports to be around some great coaches in Southern Illinois. I mean, I've witnessed some wonderful players. I've witnessed some wonderful. I guess the thing that has impressed me the most about basketball in Southern Illinois over the years is the closeness of the people, not just in the towns, because they are loyal. If you're from Benton, you don't like West Frankfort. If you're from Buckner, you definitely didn't like Christopher back in the day. And I could go on and on. If you're from Carbondale, you didn't like Murfreesboro and vice versa. But I will say this, among the coaches that I've interacted with in high school basketball in the 50 years now almost that I've been doing this, and in the administrators, in the fans, and in particular the athletic directors, they're a tight-knit group. When the ball goes up mid-court for that jump, and when the clock starts, they're there for their team and their fans and their community. But once the horn goes off, in most cases, they'll put their arm around each other, just like I'm doing right here with Tom Wheeler, Coach Wheeler. Among the finest examples of what coaching should be, and his brother, who's here as well today, Wendell, has been a great example of that. But I think back on the great athletic directors, because as a journalist, they can either make or break your night. I think of a great one in Heron, Illinois, for example, Paul Restivo. I don't know how long he was the athletic director at Heron High School, but that guy went out of his way to accommodate people like me from a little bitty paper, the Benton Evening News up the road from Heron, maybe 20 miles or whatever it was. But every time I would come to cover a game in Heron, he would come up to me, put his arm on my shoulder and say, "Caesar, is there anything you need?" He said, "Don't forget at halftime there's sandwiches and brownies in the back room over there." You know, duh. I'll come back to that place, as opposed to some high schools that I've photographed in Southern Illinois where I didn't get that kind of cooperation. I'll give you an example. In one high school in Southern Illinois, I went one night. I think it was during regional or sectional tournament time. I went in and took a seat on the floor. That's how we used to do it back in the old days. We weren't assigned spaces. We just took a seat on the floor. And to get the kind of photographs I wanted, I usually sat under the basket and a little bit to the side, as most photographers did back in that day. You didn't shoot from the stands, you shot from right on the floor. Sometimes it was a dangerous place. I had to roll out of the way. I like to have a $5 bill for every time I've had to duck and dodge. But fortunately, I only got seriously hurt one time, but I got over that. But anyway, I started to say at this one high school, a rather large high school, the Benton Rangers were playing for a tournament title against the home team. So I go in, and I go sit on the court before the game starts, and all of a sudden, here comes these pom-pom girls. And they march in and all pretty and happy, and nothing against them. I've been a fan of girls' athletics. You can ask all the lady coaches and most of the kids I've covered. That I'm definitely not against sports on the feminine side, Title IX or anything, Title X, whatever it's called. But when those pom-pom girls sit out in front of me and started shaking those pom-poms, I couldn't see anything. How was I going to take pictures of the Benton Rangers and the Carbondale Terriers? I'll name it, the Carbondale Terriers, when these pom-pom girls are going like this in front of me. Well, as luck would have it, a photographer at that time for the Southern Illinois, his name was Butch Nevius. He later became a professor and later president of a college. So Butch and I were friendly competitors. He was a great photojournalist, and he respected my work as well. So he and I were the two photographers sitting behind those girls. And the minute they got there and sat down, I looked at him and he looked at me, and I tapped the one that's sitting in front of me on the shoulder. Before the jump ball went up, before the clock started, I said, "Excuse me, hon." I said, "Would you mind," you could call girls hon now, but you can't do that anymore. I said, "Excuse me, hon, would you mind moving over a little bit, and also the other girl just kind of spread out so Butch and I can get our photographs?" And she looked at me, "No." Turn around, look straight ahead. Okay. Okie dokie. So how are we gonna handle this? Butch says, I think we need to talk to the administrator. So the game starts. Butch and I get up. We walk around, and we go to the front where you come in with the tickets, and I ask for the athletic director. Well, we get him after a point. He comes up, and I tell him what's going on. He says, nope, I'm not moving them. Those girls have a job to do too. You guys find somewhere else. I looked at Butch, he looked at me. He said, Caesar, let's go have a beer. And I said, I don't drink, but let's go have something. And we left. That game did not have photographs in the Southern Illinois, and the next day, it didn't have photographs in the Benton Evening News that weekend. Why? Because we chose that way. And guess what? Later on, we got an apology. The Southern Illinois got an apology. I got a personal phone call, and my next step was going to be to contact the ISHA because there are certain parameters that are designed both on that level and on the collegiate level where journalists with cameras have assigned seating places. I ran into that at SIU one time down the road, and I contacted Rich Clarkson of the National Press Photographers Association, and I asked him, he was in Kansas at the time, I said, Rich, I called him, I said, we're having some trouble at SIU. We normally slot on these places, and we got pom-pom girls. For some reason, it always happened in Carbondale. We have pom-pom girls in front of us, and they won't move. And isn't there an assigned space? He said, I'll take care of that, Caesar. He said, what's your fax number at the Benton Evening News? I told him, and he said, I'll take care of that. Well, it turns out that Rich followed up by faxing to me a chart and the NCAA recommended guidelines providing spaces on each end of the court for photojournalists, okay? A specific box area. You notice they always sit on one side of the basket. That's for a reason. It turns out he also sent a copy to the athletic director at SIU at that time. And the next SIU game I came to, guess what? Those pom-pom girls were not in front of the shooters anymore. Why am I telling you this? I don't know. I don't feel like I was being picked on. I guess what I'm telling you this, why I'm telling you this is that's just some things I remember. But like I said, it gets back to the athletic directors, the ones who took care of you and the ones who didn't. And it was the same way with coaches. There were certain coaches on important games, I felt like I wanted to get in the locker room at halftime and show him talking, or him talking at that time, to his team. And do you know what? Oftentimes, they didn't want that, but in many cases they did, and I respected it either way, and I never thought less of them if they declined. But basically, that's my career in a nutshell. I still take photographs. I don't shoot much sports anymore. I do shoot the Southern Illinois Miners home opener every year. I did it the other night and had some photographs published in yesterday's Marion paper. I think I had about 3 from the home opener, and I've got some more being published today from that event. They weren't action photos, they're feature photos, basically about people eating hot dogs and the food that's available, kids getting excited, kids in costume on the field. Anyway, that's what I do, and I still do it. And somebody asked me, are you ever going to quit taking photographs? I said, probably when I can't lift a camera anymore. And because I love it, it's my passion. And I like that old saying, if you do something you love and you can make a living at it, you don't work a day of your life. And for almost 50 years now, I've been blessed to say that. That I've really, in the last 50 years, I have worked a few days of my life because, and one other thing, as a photojournalist, we used to have our inside joke. People would say, man, you get to see, you're sitting right down there, you get to see these guys come right at you, you get to see the mistakes, you get to see the great things that happen, the duds, you see it all. I said, yeah, but I never see the end. We always have to leave at halftime to get the damn great photos in the paper the next day. I said, I've got the best seat in the house other than on the bench until halftime, then it's adios folks, then I have to listen to it on the radio in the dark. But all in all, I've been blessed to have a wonderful job, if you want to call it that, and to be able to get paid for it and to support my family. I'm one blessed human being. All I got to say about that.
My name's Tom Wheeler, and I just want to Thanks, Caesar, for joining me here in my garage in downtown Buckner, which I want to promote. It's sort of a museum of Southern Illinois sports, and pretty proud of it. I'm a McLeansboro boy. My dad was a house mover, and we traveled a lot. I've got 4 brothers, so there was 5 Wheeler boys, and we graduated from 5 different high schools in 4 different states. And I'm saying that because the one thing all 4 of the other brothers would have loved to do was graduated from McLeansboro, and the name Wheeler made it carried on and on. And of course, a couple of us got into coaching, and I think that's because of our parents. I never wanted to work after I worked with Dad, and I said the last thing I want to do is work for a living. I'm going to do something I like. And I thought it would be coaching, and that went back to the 5th grade. When I was the 5th and 6th grade, I lived in LaPorte, Indiana, and they had about 7 or 8 elementary schools, and I went to 10th Street, and I'll never forget, he only dressed 10 players, and one of them wasn't me. And I can still feel that feeling right now, sitting behind that bench thinking, maybe at halftime he'll let me trade with one of these other 5th graders. And from that time on, I knew I was going to be a coach, and I wouldn't have kids sitting back there. I'd get them all suits. So otherwise, my life's not been that exciting, I guess. I've met a lot of people. I was fortunate enough to go to school with some really great people that I looked up to, and Jerry Sloan and David Lee and Kurt Reed and Jimmy Burns and Carl Mock, and the list goes on. And I coached a couple places. Last 27 years I ended up here at Christopher, a football school, but it was also a great track school, and we had a player named T.J. Wheeler that wasn't too bad to fill the gym. And I also had an opportunity to work under Harry Statham at McHenry 1 year, and about 5 years under Mitch Haskins at Wren Lake. I think the thing that, and I think Caesar brought this up, that I loved about Southern Illinois was the people. I remember when I retired, the Southern did a story on me, and I had to admit that I really liked the officials that went on. But I've been so blessed with so many. God just gave us so much living in this little town and meeting the little people. And when you look back through my garage, you see that my nephews and my brother's kids and just a lot of Wheelers really excelled in sports, which was good. But I was like more. I think there's more coaches out there like me than there is like David Lee or Rich Herron, because we love the game. We never won big. I never won a regional, but that didn't mean we didn't love the kids and didn't love the competition. And I think here in Southern Illinois, I could tell you every starter for Ziegler Ralton, who's our big rivalry, the 11 years I coached, because you just get to know them. And now as you get older, you run into those kids and you watch their kids play. And Southern Illinois sports, especially in basketball, has just been a great experience for me and my family. I think David Lee was a mentor, because he was a senior when I was a junior. He took me under his wing, and of course David coached the McLeansboro team that went undefeated, and now David's son is coaching in Collinsville and doing a great job up there. When I got to college, there was a guy named Chuck Garrett that was a great influence on me. He played on the Centralia team that battled Collinsville, and supposedly the most perfect game, in tournament history. And then of course it was a 1-point game, and Collinsville went on. But I'll never forget my freshman year. We were in the dorms, and I went in to brush my teeth in a full class, and we were talking, and he said, "You're playing basketball?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I just want to be a coach. I want to learn as much as I can." And I'll never forget Chuck said, "Don't do that. You get out there and make sure that you play. Play." And I thought, man, this is my new idol. And then the next year when I got to start along with Chuck Garrett at McHenry College and Kurt Reed, I can't even explain it. I get goosebumps talking about it now. I think, Caesar, and I'll ask you this, I think that the thing about it is, even today, the small schools down here, their fans are just as radical, if not so, than the big schools you covered for the Southern.
Oh, no question. You've got towns south of us here. We're sitting in Buckner right now, but you've got the Gorevilles. Man, they put a team on the floor every year. You keep thinking they're going to have an off year, those Black Cats. But you don't want to play them on their home court come tournament time, am I right?
Definitely right.
You've got these little pockets where the gym fills up. And now they're filling up for girls' sports.
Right.
Not like they should. Not like Bruce talked about Iowa before. Girls' high school basketball in Iowa, wrestling in Iowa, they never really did take off in this part of the state. I don't know if that's the case in northern Illinois anymore. Is it, Chuck? Did girls' basketball finally...
It depends on the area and the tradition.
Okay, right.
So if you go like the Maine West High School up at
Right.
Park Ridge,
Okay.
that's huge up there. New Trier and then the Fenwick girls are tough. You take the Morton High School girls in Morton, Illinois.
Sure.
This coming year, they'll be going for a fourth state championship in 5 years.
Wow.
So there are pocket areas.
Yeah.
You'll find some schools that'll have girls basketball stronger than boys basketball.
Sure.
So Teotopolis will be a classic example. Roy Thompson's at T-Town now coaching, but T-Town, oh my goodness, what a powerhouse there. So you got the boys as well as the girls.
Sure.
Just a juggernaut in basketball.
Yeah.
It's pretty good to mention when you bring Teotopolis because, Kenny Crawford is from Southern Illinois, from Ridgeway, and we've got family down there. We went around Ridgeway and New Haven and all that, so we call Kenny our cousin because, once you're in Southern Illinois, everybody's your cousin.
And that reminds me, too, of the late, great Coach Bob Dallas, who shall I say, he succeeded in the middle of nowhere. And probably, other than people like you and I and Wendell and Bruce, you go to north of Effingham, which I wanted to get into that, too. Talking about Southern Illinois basketball, Wendell and yourself and myself were talking a while ago before this started about, in my opinion, in my view, that I've covered Southern Illinois basketball for 48, 49 years now. Effingham, from border to border, Indiana to Missouri, south, river to river, Ohio to Mississippi, that's always been considered Southern Illinois to most of us who live in Southern Illinois. And we basically, from the Flaming Heart south to the Payroll Pilots, river to river, that's where we followed the teams, that's who we paid attention to, that's who we watched the sport clips on at the 5 o'clock news, that's who we read the newspaper sports sections to see how they were doing. But if it talked about somebody from, let's say, Pekin or a team from another place in northern Illinois, we may glance at the headline, but basically we had that, I don't know, that separation, if you will, and we knew that there were great things going on north of Effingham, but basically we had so many little towns in southern Illinois that had these rabid, faithful fans that they kind of endeared. You can't help but root for them, am I right? I mean, if your team's not going that year, you're going to root for the team that beat you.
Yeah.
You're not going to get, you're going to go for them. One thing I have found unique about Southern Illinois, and I think both Coach Wheelers would back me up on this, Bruce, is you don't have to travel very far. When you meet a stranger, within one or two people, you know somebody in common. Now that hasn't always been the case. When I lived in northern Illinois, taught school in Streeter, Illinois, for example, I lived there a year. I didn't know anybody outside of the teachers I worked with or maybe the parents of my students. I lived in West Texas and worked for the Odessa American. I covered 3 world-class athletes while I was there in the year and a half. And other than them and the church I went to, I could walk downtown all day long. Nobody would know who I was or speak to me. But in Southern Illinois, it's different. In Southern Illinois, I guarantee you I can go to any town, or I can take a stranger from any town in Southern Illinois, introduce them to somebody else, and with 1 or 2 people, we know somebody in common.
Yeah.
It's hard to describe because it's like we take this big mass of people, 200, 300,000 in Southern Illinois, whatever it is, we put them in a shotgun way in the high in the sky, And we say, okay, guys, we're gonna spread you out a little bit, and we shoot all these little towns on the map. But everybody in these little towns is related or knows somebody who moved to another town or coached for another guy. It's really unique. It's a very, very unique place to grow up in. Other states have small towns, but they may be 50 or 60 or 70 miles away from each other. But in Southern Illinois, we are a family regarding sports. And if somebody gets, in that sporting community, if somebody has bad luck, they rally. Am I right?
Yeah.
They rally.
100%.
100%. And that's because of that small town. Anyway, I wanted to mention that.
Yeah, too quick. Cedar mentioned Bob Dallas, and, that's when things come to your mind when you get old, but on my interview here, I had an interview at Christopher, and my superintendent lived a block and a half behind me here. His name was Joe Wilkerson, and it was sort of an odd interview because he had his overalls on and his boots, and he was frying fish. And he just sat down and he looked at my resume, and he said, well, you got a master's, you must know what you're doing. And he said, what's your goals at Christopher? Just like that, And of course, I was nervous as could be. And I said, and this is true, I said, I want to be the Bob Dallas of the Black Diamond.
Did you really?
Yeah, I mean, because
Wow.
when you're an athlete, especially, I don't know, in Southern Illinois we're talking again, but when you're an athlete and you go places to play, and I watched Ridgeway, when I was in high school, and Bob Dallas was the guy I always wanted to play for. And like Cesar said, another story is, when I retired, I started working at the Wren Lake Golf Course. I wouldn't really work, but I got paid. And if people would come in, I would do that. I would tell the young guys working with me, this guy's from Edwardsville. I know somebody that one of those four guys know. And we were talking. But anyway, I was talking to my pro, and he was from Hyde Park, New York. And I said, excuse me, Wendell, but I just said it. I said, hey, do you happen to know a guy named George Jeffrey Carling, Jeff Carling from Hyde Park, New York? And he looked at me and he said, Tom, there's like 1.8 million people in Hyde Park, New York, And I said, but in Southern Illinois, everybody knows everybody,
Exactly.
And I think that was a great example. And that's the thing about it, when I tell people I went to school with Jeff Carling, the Centralia nut, and guys like that. And so then I can get on a roll and I can tell Jeff Carling stories all day. Because he roomed with my brother Steve, and Steve finally kicked him out when my brother Steve didn't have any more clean underwear, because Jeff was taking them all. And that's where Jeff was, and of course, he is so good. And I think another thing that asked Caesar about it too, I think when I was growing up and when I started coaching, there was always somebody to go see. On nights when I wasn't scouting, I wanted to go to Benton to see Bruce Baker play. Of course, being a McLeansboro boy, I didn't miss a game Brian Sloan played. But there was people, Monty Coonard at DuQuoin, I can go up and down the line. Jimmy Mitchell at Ziegler, we played him 18 times in his 4 years of high school, and he won 17 of them. And you go, when Stephen Bartle played at down at Carbondale, Bruce, there were just so many. And I think if there's one thing that's changed, I think we still got good teams here, but we don't have that individual. Me and Jim Muir, about 2 or 3 years before we quit doing the radio, we went to see Tyra Buss play at Mount Carmel, which we consider Southern Illinois. And I think that is, I think that's the one thing missing now. We don't have that one, I guess, standout. We still got great players and great teams, and I think we got great teams down here because we got great coaches. We don't have the ability that they have up around, where you're from, but I think our coaches do such a good job down here of doing the little things. And the other thing is, it's not just during basketball season now to coach. If you're going to be a basketball coach, you got to do it. You got to be it 13 months out of the year, because it just takes all that extra. And with the travel ball and the summer ball now, it makes a difference. But I just think there's so many memories that from Southern Illinois basketball that we could talk about? Well,
you-
what are some of the good players you
Oh, my
remember?
goodness.
Just real-
Since I moved to Benton in 1970 and also started my photography career at the same time, I missed out on Rich's early great teams. I didn't get to see Rich Lumpus play. I didn't get to see some of those guys. But I have been asked, who was the greatest? Now, TJ was awesome. And please don't misunderstand when I tell you this name. Who was the greatest high school player in Southern Illinois that I actually photographed and that I saw? And I photographed and seen TJ, LaFonso Ellis, on and on while they were in high school. But I have to honestly say, Mike Duff, the late Mike Duff of El Dorado, was the greatest high school basketball player that I personally saw play in a game and that I covered. And when that young man lost his life on that plane crash when the Evansville basketball team all lost their lives, the NBA really missed out on one fine young man and one spectacular player. There was no doubt in my mind, and I can't remember thinking that, even when I saw Alfonso Ellis in a super sectional and photographed him at Carbondale, and people said, well, he's going to be in the NBA, you got to go watch him. He didn't impress me like Mike Duff. Mike Duff had all the tools. He was a great individual, and it was a tremendous loss for all those players and the coaches and the media that died on that plane crash. But anyway, Mike Duff, you thought he was pretty good too, didn't you?
Here's my Mike Duff story. We're running a basketball camp, and I was one of the few, I guess, that we would go from 8 to 12, 6 days one weekend, 6 days that first. So we go 8 for 12, 12 hours, $25, and you got t-shirt and sweatbands. You know, I mean, because I loved it. You know, I was getting people from anywhere. But anyway, Bobby Brown brought El Dorado over one year, and after he spoke, and he brought about 8 or 9 players, and they did demonstrations, and it was really good. And I said, Coach Brown, would it be okay if your guys like played one-on-one at all 6 baskets with my players? So he said, yeah. So I said, okay, guys, now here's going to be, if you beat one of these El Dorado players, you come over, because I'll buy you a soda after camp. Well, it starts, we go 5 or 10 minutes, next thing I know, a little Scotty Bean comes over or something, you know, and he says, I won. I said, okay. And then it's about 5 minutes later, and another little Johnny Jones comes over and said, I won. Okay. And then I'm looking around, you know, and there's Duff and Kingston and Rusty Phillips and all these guys, and then here comes another one 3 minutes later. I said, wait a minute, who are you beating? He points over to Kevin Kingston, who we also lost in that plane crash.
Correct.
He said, that guy over there, I beat him 5-0. And Kevin just died with laughing, you know. But that's the type of scholar, athletes, person, people that we had. And we could tell El Dorado stories over and over. But now you got me in a row. My best story is Bruce Baker. Okay, Bruce Baker, you know, moved down to Central and had the great teams, went to state and all that, went to UAB and played for Gene Bargo. Well, about my 3rd or 4th year here at Christopher, our floor, when I got there, the year before, pipes underneath had busted and there was all types of cracks, and they nailed it back together. It was terrible. First time I played David, when McLeansburg come to Christopher, he said, are you going to sweep the floor or do something to it? And I said, if you want it swept, you sweep. I swear David Lee went out and was sweeping our floor. So our superintendent and athletic director, Max McDonald, bought us a portable floor. Now, Bruce, at that time, the Chicago Bulls, University of Illinois, and Christopher Bearcats had a portable floor. And it was like 2 3/4 inches, and a company guy come down and showed our custodians how to put it together and all that. Well, as soon as basketball, and of course they had to raise the rims, of course, as soon as basketball season was over, they just stuck them on these little carts and shoved them aside. Well, all of a sudden basketball camps are ready to start, and the custodians they're too busy to bring my rims down. They said, we'll do it tomorrow. So I'm starting camp with 80 some odd kids, and they're shooting 2.5 inches too high, but I don't tell them. Bruce Baker, the All-American, comes to camp, does a great job of speaking to them, and of course the little guys are saying, dunk it. I said, yeah, let's go ahead and dunk it. He just barely dunks the first one. I said, man, I'm getting old. I said, no, get it for that. So he goes up again, and he just couldn't get it down. I gotta be honest, I never told him. The rim was almost 3 inches too tall.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Lord Bruce, he deserved that.
Oh, yeah. I could,
That's funny.
I could tell.
He was a
camp
great,
stories.
he was a great.
And that's the other thing about it,
Yeah.
during my camps, I mean, Dick Korn brought his guys over. Big Mike Cruz,
Oh,
you
yeah.
definitely know, you coached against him at State, he brought his son, the Tank. Wendell was just a player at Wren Lake, he come and spoke, and the coaches would, and I didn't pay him nothing. I probably should have taken him to lunch or something, maybe sometimes, or Holly Sloan came, and Kurt Reed's daughter come, because we had girls at camp, and Holly was a great player, and I asked Holly, I said, I thought Brian was coming, because little Kurt come and Darren Lee come. I had 5 or 6 McLeansboro people, and I said, I thought Brian was coming. I mean, I've told him Brian Sloan's going to be here, and he said, well, he got up and started getting dressed, and Jerry said, what are you doing, Brian? He said, well, I'm going to Coach Wheeler's camp to speak to me and Holly. He said, no, you're not. Get on that tractor. We've got a lot of work to do, and it's just...
Speaking of Jerry Sloan,
Correct.
Jerry is at a stage in his life where he's not very well, but you must have a Jerry Sloan story or two to tell that people don't realize he was a great, great player in Southern Illinois.
He was a great player. He really was, and he never forgot where he came from.
Doug didn't either.
Doug never did.
It's hard to believe that Jerry Sloan and Doug Powell grew up 26 miles apart.
Geographic.
Yeah.
And both of them achieved national fame and in both cases international fame. But he could probably tell you a Jerry Sloan story since he was from McLeansboro like Tommy. Whereas I can tell you this about Doug. When I moved to Benton in 1969. Doug had finished already and graduated. He was at Illinois State. When I found out when I moved there that winter, and when I sold my first photograph to Benton Evening News, when I found out there was an adult baseball league, a team in Benton, I found out about it, and I told my wife, I said, man, I want to play baseball. And I was already out of college, of course, and so I found out who was with it, a guy named Wayne Shannon and Bobby Blondie, McCutcheon, Mark McCutcheon, Jackie Dean Stewart, Charlie Broy were all on this team. So anyway, I joined the team, and I became a player that summer with them, and we played around when we could find teams to play. We played at a federal prison, and the Bridgers always rooted for us, by the way. But I'm going to tell you the Doug Collins story. It was early on that summer season of 1970 rather, when we were playing, and there was this gangly kid in the dugout patting us on the back when we would get a hit or whatever. We come into the dugout, and I didn't know him. I moved to Benton in 69, remember, and I'm a new kid on the block. I grew up in Waltonville, spent 4 years at SIU, taught up north, taught in Murfreesboro, was teaching at Cecil Valier at the time. So I'm playing baseball, and I come into the dugout, and this kid's patting me on the back, said, way to go, way to go. And so we go back out in the field, and I go by Blondie, and I say, hey, Blondie, who is that tall, skinny kid that acts like he knows us? I said, I don't know that guy. He laughed. He said, you don't know Doug Collins? I said, no, I don't know Doug Collins. Well, I got to know Doug Collins. And subsequently, I became a big fan of Doug's and followed his career. And as we know, he was the #1 draft pick in the NBA back then. One of the few white guys, maybe 2 fellas of Caucasians have been drafted #1 pick since Doug, but not very many at all. But anyway, Doug was, for us around this part of the state, he was the gold standard in basketball, and he never forgot where it came from, like Tom said. And I had the pleasure of going with Coach Heron and a bunch of other Doug's friends down to the Memphis Grizzlies game about 5 or 7 years ago, whatever it was. We did a little feature for the magazine. Did you get to go on that trip?
No.
Okay, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But we got to see Doug, and he gave us all hugs, and just, he was special, and he still is, and he doesn't forget where he came from, not to this very day. Now, you can probably share a Jerry Sloan story, because I actually spent more time talking to his wife Bobby when I ran into her in McLeansboro, and his late wife Bobby,
Yeah, that was also because she was beautiful.
that's what I started saying.
Don't blame.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I saw her mowing the grass one day out in the front yard in McLeansboro. I was over there looking for features, and I pulled a car over, and she waved to stop the mower, and I said, "You're Jeremy Sloan's wife, Bobby, aren't you?" She said, "Yes." So we got to talking, and I took a picture of her and mowing the grass, and I did a little feature story about the coach's wife, And but there she was, They had all the money in the world. She could have hired a yard guy, but there she was back in McLeansboro, and he was out in the farm on a tractor.
Yeah.
And that was just them.
I think Jerry and Bobby will both say coming to McLeansboro 3 or 4 years so Brian and Holly could play in McLeansboro was one of the greatest things they did. I think that's when Jerry got released as a coach at the Bulls, and he's admitted to us before he was too young. He jumped at it too soon, And people don't realize that Jerry Sloan was the first player to have his Bulls jersey retired. It wasn't Michael, it was Jerry Sloan. So when you talk about a guy from Gobbler's Knob, and we talked about him yesterday and hitchhiked in, he actually hitchhiked in every morning, But
Tough as nails.
Yeah, and the thing I remember, when I was a sophomore, I guess, and I got to dress varsity a little, and after you do all your drills and all that, and Lee started, David took me under his wing and said, "Come on, Wheeler, over here with us." I get to go over and play catch with Jerry Sloan and Kurt Reed, and a couple games, when we were playing football, Jerry or Kurt, "Hey, Wheeler, carry my bag in." Well, yes, sir, you just did it. But I'll never forget my sophomore year, that after a JV game, we played Mount Vernon, Indiana. And after about a half, I just decided to go home, and I walked on home, and when I got to school the next day, Jerry was already there in the old McLeansboro where you walk in, and I said, "Did we win last night?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "How'd you do?" Toe, they call him Toe, T-O-E. "How'd you do, Toe?" He said, "I had 52. And then I took about 4 steps up the steps and said, "What'd you say?" He said, "I had 50. I mean, it was just like, yeah, I had 6, I had 12. And then the other story I always like to tell on Jerry was when I was at McHenry with Coach Statham, we went to a clinic in Chicago, and Jerry happened to be the main speaker, And afterward, he come over and he said, and he always called me Tommy D. You could tell when I run into somebody in McLeansboro, they'll call me Tommy D. What are you doing here? And I introduced Coach Statham and did all that. And I said, "How you doing, Jerry?" And he said, "Well, I was glad to see anybody from McLeansboro, but we flew into Los Angeles last week, and a guy come up to me. He rode my school bus with me, and Tommy, I didn't know what his name was. I felt terrible." And I'm thinking, here's a guy that 18 million people in the Chicago area and Illinois would love to talk to Jerry, and he's worried about, I can't think of that guy's name. When we had our class reunion, I'm not going to say what year it was, I think it was our 50th or whatever, a few years back, I was sitting in the garage, and we were having it that night in McLeansboro, and I said to myself, I wonder if I got Jerry's number on my phone. So I had it, and you probably never heard this, Bub. So I called him, and I called him and said, "Jerry," and he said, "Tommy D, how you doing?" And I almost broke up, and I said, "Hey, we're having a class reunion of 62, man. If you could just come by and visit with some of us, And he said, "We got family coming in," and he said, I'll try, but I don't know if we can make it or not." And that's when he was married to Tammy, now the new girl. He said, I don't know if we'll make it or not. And I'm getting goosebumps, and just out of the blue, I just said, "Jerry, I love you." And he said, "What?" I just want to tell you, there's so many people in the state of Illinois, and especially Southern Illinois, that would tell you the same thing, but, they don't have enough nerve to, And he said, "Well, I appreciate it." I said, "You're, for what you did for McLeansboro and all of us following you, I just think you're the greatest." And he said, "Well, thank you." He said, I'll try to get up for Tommy D." And I think that wraps up, who Jerry was. He never, well, I told you the story when Harry Gallatin had come yesterday when we were eating. Harry Gallatin, I don't know if you heard this, at SIU come to recruit him, and they were out in Gobbler's Knob, and when they got done, Janie Hattie, his mom, said, hey, Coach, are you busy, or could you help us do something for a minute? And of course, Harry Gallatin was, 6'6", 280 or something. He said, well, yeah, I'll do whatever you want, you know? And she said, well, somebody knocked our outhouse over last night. Could you go help Jerry set it back up? And I thought, what a small world. Small world. So,
Both of you mentioned some interesting people along the way.
Sure.
And you mentioned Coach Carling, but there's some very successful and also some very unique coaches, and some were both.
Sure.
Do you have any stories you want to share with us in regards to some coaches in Southern Illinois that were iconic figures in our rich basketball history?
Well, along those lines, I'll share a little personal vignette, and I think it speaks volumes of the difference a coach can make in someone's life. And he's a coach that I know Tommy knows, retired now, and I think Wendell will probably remember the name, although Wendell is younger than this coach. But when I was in Whartonville High School, the high school had like 109 students. My graduating class had 29 in it, class of 62, like this young man in McLeansboro, 62. Like I said, baseball was my sport. I wasn't a very good basketball player. I was a team member, but I was the guy down the bench, okay? Well, on one practice, my sophomore or junior year, I forget which, it might have been my senior year, but on one practice, the basketball coach, his name was Dave Simpson. Wonderful man, wonderful man. Dave was running a play with the guys, and I missed it somehow, totally just blanked out, didn't get it at all. Well, a couple of studs on the team made this sideways remark to each other, but loud enough that everybody heard it, including me. And Coach Simpson picked up on the fact that it embarrassed me, okay? Well, guess what Coach Simpson does? He stops the practice. He looks at those two guys, he walks over to me, and he puts his hand on my shoulder, looks at the whole team, goes like this, and he says, let me tell you something, you two jokesters over there who think you're so hot, if you had half the heart that Caesar Marini has and tried to put the best on the floor of the ability he has, we could go to the state tournament. So I don't want to see any more of this four-letter word. That was it. To this day, he's my favorite teacher of all time. I had him for social studies, but I also had him, he won my heart. Because as a coach and as a teacher, he modeled for me what I always should remember as a teacher. That guy that's sitting on the end of the bench, that guy that doesn't have the talent that those other guys do, he's just as important to you as those two studies. Never forgot it. And when I became a teacher, well, I was raised by the kindest man I ever knew, so I loved each one of my students in the 5th grade all those years, whether their father was on the school board or whether their father was in prison. And it's not rocket science as far as my philosophy of education and what I taught. Kids need love, discipline, and respect. And if you give them love, discipline, aka structure, and respect, they'll go to the mat for you. And they'll also learn. And later on, you'll see it develop and you'll see it happen. And that's true with good coaches like these two guys. If you give the kids structure, they all want structure and discipline, am I right?
Yeah.
They may not tell you that.
Yeah.
They act differently, but they need that. They need that. And, but anyway, I just wanted to mention about how a coach, and to this day, he probably doesn't even remember what he did, but he changed my life. He really did. He made me realize that you can make a kid feel special. I never forgot it. Haven't forgotten it to this day, as you can tell. And it was a coach that became my favorite teacher because he took a moment to stand up for me, okay?
What did I tell you a while ago when we were talking earlier, Luce, before the guys get here? Caesar doesn't remember what he said, but he remembers how Coach Simpson made him feel.
That's
And
exactly it.
That's it. I think one of my biggest thrills when I was assistant coach at Johnson City, we played in the Heron sophomore tournament every year, and I got to coach against Walt Moore. I mean, I got to shake hands with him. I got to look at him, and And he was so nice, and I gave him that, we're not very good, coach, and you're Carbondale, and I thought he really not eased up on us, but played all of his guys, One of my biggest thrills in coaching was getting to know Dick Ruggles. He was my freshman coach at Nashville, I told you, and when we coached football together, and then when we started basketball, he sat down with me and he said, "No, what do you want me to emphasize? What do you want me to do? What's your game plan?" And I said, "You're Dick Ruggles. I'm Tommy Wheeler. I'm going to learn from you. I'll tell you right now." I said, "You do what you think is the best." And when I got fired at Nashville, it was a shock, even though looking back now. But anyway, he was the guy that come to me and talked to me. He said, "Wheels, let me explain, and this, it wasn't what you did or how you taught." And that was the only time that he talked about his son that had passed away, about how just strange things happened. But Dick Ruggles and Walton Moore was two coaches that I really respected.
In the Southern Illinois Sports Connection,
Right.
there was a feature on gyms. And the gyms in Southern Illinois are so historical,
they
so
are.
nostalgic. The gyms up in the northern part of the state are what I call cookie cutter gyms. They're all pretty much the same.
Sure.
But when you walk in and see some of these unique gyms,
Oh, gosh.
could you expound on that a little bit? Maybe which gym was the toughest to win a game in?
You want me to go first on that?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll give you time to think.
As a photojournalist, I kind of always appreciated the lay of the land, so to speak, when I would walk into one of these gyms. And when I would go in one for the first time, I would always kind of think, wow, I didn't know that Shawneetown played in this little cracker box. Or I didn't realize Thompsonville, their gym was so small that the free throw line's almost finished. And, and I didn't realize.
There's three lines, center line.
Exactly.
You had to go past it, then it was.
Yeah, but I'll never forget, somebody asked me a few years ago about our basketball barns in Southern Illinois, and I said, well, we've got a lot of great ones, but the ones that are still going, if you ever get a chance, and it sounds like you need to do that while you're down this part of the state, Bruce, but the West Frankfort gym,
That's what I told him last night.
to me, they could have filmed Hoosiers in there. In fact, it would have probably been a better gym, color-wise and atmosphere-wise, than the gym they used for Hoosiers. It is spectacular, and they've retained the ambience of what it was like 40, 50 years ago when they built it. It hasn't changed. The seats still have the same wear. It looks like they haven't been repainted in 50 years. The bleachers that sit up high, the colors, the wood, it's spectacular. I mean, do you agree with me?
No, there's no doubt.
Is that your number one too?
That's the very first one I told him he
Yeah,
needed to do.
and then Trout Gymnasium, before they built a new gym in Centralia, that was a special place. And other than that, they were all kind of unique and different. Most of them were small. They all had hard floors when you sat on the floor, like I used to have to do. Those are my favorite memories. But one thing I'm proudest of related to high school basketball in Southern Illinois, and especially related to the sports magazine, Bruce, is right before they tore down a 100-year-old, well, at least 70 or 80-year-old gym in the town I grew up in, Waltonville, there set this old skating rink. It was a skating rink when I was in high school, but it had been a basketball gymnasium for Waltonville High School and Waltonville Grade School from the 20s on up through. And I was actually able to go in there and photograph the inside of that place, still looking like it almost did years ago, and the exterior, and talk to the owner, and do a feature for the magazine, and also for our TV show that we had going for a little while. 2 weeks before it was bulldozed down. And I just happened to be up there, and I thought, I want to do a story on this basketball facility, and that's when I found out 2 weeks later it was going to be bulldozed. So, I hope somebody does something to preserve the memory and integrity of places like the gym in West Frankfort before it gets bulldozed, because it'll come. It'll come, yeah. And like you said, too many cookie cutters.
Caesar sent me some pictures one night when, and he said, hey, you need to do a story on this gym. And it was the Buckner gym. He drove by there and before they were tearing it down and everything, and stuff, so I had to do some research on that. I think I get back to Cobden, I didn't realize how there's not a lot of places where you walk into anymore and you just feel the apple knockers, and since I told you my brother Wendell is a head coach there now, and I think he embraces that feeling for the kids and does as much as he can for Coach Ruggles and get them. But I think Cobden Apple Knocker Gym is one
special.
That it just whatever it might be. For me, I like Heron's gym, El Dorado gym, North City's gym. I love to play at El Dorado. I love to coach there in the El Dorado tournament. They're just
the Pinckneyville gym.
Pinckneyville with
it's got its character.
And I like the fact that like Pinckneyville, when they built the new school, kept the gym.
Kept it. And Heron did as well.
Heron really fixed theirs up.
They fixed it up well.
And those are the ones I as a player I didn't like the Harrisburg gym because at McLeanburg we thought it was so bad. It was so bad and it's so big, and we were used to.
You felt like you were in a World War II airport.
Yeah, it really was. But then we're rednecks down here. Let's face it, we're proud of it. And I used to love the Harrisburg trip because when we start getting into town, you could hear those sophomores yell, "Hey, there it is! It's red now! It's red now!" I said, "What do you mean?" "Oh no, now it's yellow." We'd never seen street lights before, the stop sign and stuff. But Harrisburg was been. The other place where I really got goosebumps was in Shagnon, the old gym. At Mount Vernon, it was just, maybe it's because you knew the heredity, and I just thought of this when I was a junior or senior. Terry Gambler and who you interviewed, and Jim Burns, played together at Northwood. We went up there and played over Christmas break, and I got to actually play on the gym floor. But we seen Centralia with Jeff and them, and that's another. And then, as I told you, when you walk in the new gym now, it's
not
sort of
the same.
sad. And the bad part about all this, though, guys, is that our young kids don't realize. And that's what I think's great about this Hall of Fame, and I think that was great about our magazine, is we brought back so many names and stories from the past. But those were some of the gems that pop at me right now.
It was almost like we looked into a mirror that you could see the past in. And the magazine, if you will, was kind of like a way to show people around Southern Illinois what the past was.
Yeah.
They could look into this window instead of a mirror, if I can use that analogy. We gave them a window to the past, and that's what all our local newspapers did, and that's why I'm just really troubled and saddened by the fact that all the local newspapers in our communities are dying. Nobody under 50, like I said before, buys a newspaper. I still get 3 newspapers every day. When I get out on my front porch in the morning and have breakfast, there lays 3 newspapers. USA Today, get it every day. The Southern Illinois lays there, and the Marion Daily, because that's what I work for now, and that's where I live, okay? If I was in Benton, and by the way, I still get the Benton Evening News, so basically I get 4 newspapers, but the Benton Evening News is now weekly. But my son, well-read, has his doctorate. He hasn't had a newspaper in his home since, how shall I say this, since Sesame Street was popular. And it bothers me. I think, Brett, how can you keep up with sports? He follows sports. He loves them. He still does. Having grown up in Benton, how could you not? And went to high school there and graduated. But he's like everybody else under 50. They want it like this and they want it fast. That's just the way. And how do you get these kids in high school to come to the games? I mean, that's what saddens me. I'll see the sports reports with Darren Kennard on Channel 3. Those guys do a terrific job of covering local news and local sports. A really great job, so I'll give them a shout out. But when I see the highlights, I see empty stands, and it saddens me. Even, I see that wonderful little Cobden gym in a game, and percentage-wise of the seating available, he probably does a whole lot better than Carbondale and Benton and West Frankfort do now. No question, because in those little towns, that's still part of the only thing to do. But even then, when you look at the kids who are in high school, they're sitting there in the stands, they're doing this. And how do you capture that again? I don't know. I really don't know.
Since you're Tommy, the people that are attending this, our museum are coming from every part of Illinois.
Right, okay.
So would you help educate them about who are some of the big rivalries in Southern Illinois? Small schools versus small schools and big schools versus big schools. What would be some of the big rivalries that we would want to educate them on?
The ones I covered, and I'll just mention a half dozen or so that come to mind immediately, and then Tom can probably educate you on a whole lot more because having been a coach, he would know a lot more of those than me. But in the time that I've covered Southern Illinois sports for the last 50 years now, I would say you have to go West Frankfort Benton. You have to go Carbondale Murfreesboro. You have to go Nashville Centralia. Maybe not. Nashville didn't.
Well, basketball-wise, Nashville Pinckneyville's been on the.
That's why I started to say Nashville Pinckneyville. Okay. You got to go Mount Vernon Centralia. Am I right on that?
Yeah.
So that's about a half dozen there that come to mind. And then you get into the little ones. You got Cesar, Waltonville back in the day. You got Crab Orchard against Mooresville back in the day. You have Blueford against Wayne City and Dalvin back in the day.
Yeah.
You got Caro against Mounds Meridian in the Deep South. You have Chester against Sparta. Remember those big rivalry?
Yeah.
Okay.
McLeansboro, El Dorado.
El Dorado, McLeansboro. I'm geographically bouncing around down here. And you have
Carmi Fairfield was a big
Carmi Fairfield. Okay, the Mules against the. And that's another thing. I don't know if you guys have thought about this, but is there going to be any aspect of the basketball museum regarding mascots and the great names and the great characters?
Yeah.
I mean, you go from the Freeburg Midgets to the Pretzels of
New Barley.
there you go, and you go to they go on and on. Name some of those that had unusual
The best
names.
was Apple Knockers.
There you go, Tom Applenknockers, that's the coach right there, I know, yeah, that's a great one, that's an awesome one.
You've heard of Eddie Belva, who's a Hall of Fame coach from Waltonville. Well, he was a gigantic slow pitch player, and I had a kid at John City named Jimmy Dean, who was a politician, was the mayor of John City, and they played together, and they played like right center and right field, and they would come to games, and all they would talk about was mascots. Bearcats. I know that, and then they would show up with the Pretzels, or and it's
The Orphans.
The Orphans.
The Orphans.
When they got that name, yeah.
That would be.
Do you know the history on that, Bruce, on how they came known as the Orphans?
Yes, the story we've been told was that when Trout was taking his team up to the Pontiac tournament, and of course you're coming out of the late 30s into the early 40s, so the Depression's impacted school budgets. World War II is on the verge of taking place, so there'll be a shortage of fabric materials because it's now being geared towards the military. So one of the beat writers for one of the papers, when they saw Trout come in with this, one of the most stable coaches of all time with great teams, Dyke Elman, etc. But here they come in with uniforms that were ragtag, and here comes Trout, the old man, and his orphans.
Yeah.
And there's a book that was written by Donald Schnocky that played for Arthur Trout.
Right.
And 1946, and the name of his book is Trout, the Old Man and His Orphans.
Yeah.
Oh, how cool is that?
I've heard that story too.
There's only 1,000 that have been printed. I have 2 of the copies. Mrs. Schnocky, very soon I took her out for dinner to a nice restaurant up north called Jameson's. And I think that helped us get one of the copies of the book. And I got one off of eBay, but there was only 1,000 out there. And it is a tremendous book about the history of Southern Illinois basketball in terms of Centralia and the rivalries.
I'd heard that. Now, I'd heard the story about after you started talking.
Yeah, me too, that rung a bell.
One of the stories I'll just share with you on that was that during the Great Depression, traveling, because the schools had to travel quite a bit of distance to play some of their schools. And so there was, people couldn't afford it. So what they started doing was going to Centralia High School. And this carried on even more so during World War II, because now you have gas rationing going on. And you couldn't find tires because the rubber was being used for the war.
Sure.
So you had to patch up your tires or go to the junkyards and find spare tires out there if you were lucky.
Right.
So you carpooled, or you went and you wore your Sunday best. You would go to the Centralia Auditorium.
Okay.
And the auditorium would fill up. And people would be out in the hallway. And they wanted to know the score, so they would get the scores. We talked before this interview started about old radio interviews. Then there have been some of the first ones where the game was being broadcasted. So even when the orphans were on the road, it was a social event at Centralia's Auditorium to know the latest. And in fact, and this is what Donald writes about in his book, is that people would dress up in their best to be seen every day. And I know that Galesburg and Quincy, with their rivalry, people, you packed the gym, you couldn't get a ticket. Season ticket holders, their tickets were passed down when they would pass away in their will. And but people always dressed up nice for these games. Cheered like crazy, but they would be dressing better than they would if they were going to church.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It was like that in McLeansboro. Now that you're talking, I mean, it was a social. Friday and Saturday night there wasn't much to do in McLeansboro either, you know.
Even in Benton in the early 70s, and Christopher, you filmed Jim. Especially if you put out a good product and you guys had a winning season or a winning record. I think all of us of our ilk or our age miss that. I know I do. Yeah, I miss it a lot. It's a different world we live in. And I don't know how you recapture that. And maybe that's why it's so important that we build an Illinois Basketball Hall of Fame, because otherwise, what's going to happen to all this history? What is going to happen to it?
Well, speaking of history, and I'd like us to bring our oral history to an ending here.
Sure.
And we've had a lot of fun. You guys have interacted with each other so well with such passion. This has been a ball listening to this. But we're sitting in a very historical place. And when I found out that there was a garage in Buckner, I had to look it up. There's that little dot on the map.
Oh, I know.
And they said, Bruce, you need to get down to Tom Wheeler's garage. And so, Tom, I think this would be a good way for you to bring us home here, is to talk about your garage and the items that you have in here. Because you talk about nostalgia and you talk about history, this garage is very famous, and the radio shows have been broadcasted from this garage. Am I correct?
You're right.
I hope that your insurance is at a premium here, because you have things here are priceless and cannot be replaced.
I'm going to ask you one question before he starts his tour, okay? When was the last time a vehicle parked in this garage?
In the winter, we only get one in here.
Oh, you do put one in here? You actually bring water and snow into this floor?
My wife's card comes in, yes, mine stays inside.
I'm shocked.
It's just something I started many years ago when there was newspapers and you could cut out clippings. you
Sure.
know, and that's the thing that is bad now, because the Cobden kids at Wendell's, they can't make scrapbooks unless they run it off the internet.
And even if mom, dad, or grandpa are taking pictures, guess what? Most of them don't take them to the store to get them printed.
No, they-
So there's nothing to look at.
Right.
That's one of the sad things, am I correct, Bruce, about digital photography?
Yeah, it is.
Everybody's a photographer now, but guess what? Nobody has pictures.
Yeah.
They're all on computers, they're all on hard drives, they're all on their phones. Ask them to show you a picture that was taken 10 years ago of a great so-and-so. Oh, I don't know, it's in my computer somewhere.
Yeah.
But my wife
And
would go out scrapping
they
with
can't
our
find them,
grandkids.
and they can't find them.
And they
then.
can't find it, thank you.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
sure. But anyway, I just, my mom back in, I guess, '66 when I graduated from college, it was a college gift. It was a scrapbook of my high school and college at McHenry. And then when I started teaching, my best friend Bob Carnes, the legendary football coach at DuQuoin, and he would make scrapbooks for his players. Well, the first or second year what really got me into the scrapbook was Bobby Joe, Coach Carnes, got a speeding ticket. And I said, well, I'm going to cut that out and save it. So then everybody that I went to school with, I would, save clippings. And then when I started my Little Wheels program, any of the young kids, like the Patton brothers, Ryan Patton, the great football player, and Jason, and I would keep clippings of them. And then, of course, I could get as many as I could on Wendell and Steve and Danny Joe, my other brother that played at Johnson City. And then I really went wild when TJ went to Illinois, because I was getting the News Gazette sent to me. The Southern was covered, and a friend of mine's mother-in-law lived in Effingham, and I'd get the Effingham paper, so I've got all kinds of scrapbooks on them. And the thing about it now, I was also a stats man. And so if I have I had a couple track kids about 5 or 6 years ago that was up at T Street or something, and they were arguing that Scotty Shapcock didn't run a 23.5. And Randy Flowers, the guy that was arguing with him, he come out and he said, Coach, did Scotty run a 23.5? And I said, come on out, we'll go to the garage. So we went to the garage, and sure enough, we found a clipping, a stat where in an 800 relay, he ran a 23.5, and Scotty told Randy, he said, well, you owe me a beer. And he said, no, I don't, you didn't run the open 200. He said, we didn't say that, so they started arguing. And my whole point, and like I told you when you come in, when someone comes by to visit my garage, somewhere along the line, I will find a picture of them. And hopefully, I know for sure I'll find their name, and sometimes I'll find a picture. I worked basketball camp for Rich Aaron for 28 years, and I've got every booklet that we had, and I could sit and go over coaches that are coaching now that come to the camp. So yeah, and you know the good thing about my museum? It's free. All you gotta do is give me a ring and give me time to clean it, and I'll have it. But no, I'm pretty proud of it. I appreciate the kind words.
Well, it's May 22nd, 2019, and this was worth coming down here to meet two great men who've contributed so much to Illinois basketball. And Caesar and Tommy, you're the best.
Thank you.
And thank you for what you've given back to our state. And
We should
thank you.
have him, didn't we?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, thank you for,
Appreciate the
I feel
comment.
honored, that's exactly right, yeah.
Hold that, Bud. Let me put these in here.
Have you ever been to the Indiana High School Hall of Fame?
I have not.
I have. It's right there down from Newcastle High School. Borders up. Oh, I tell you, a nickname, Jim, I said Witt High School.
W-I-T-T?
I've coached at Witt High School, the Witt Speed Boys, that's another nickname for you.
I coached up
Speed
there.
Boys?
Witt Speed Boys off of Route 16.
We had to sit on the stage,
Yeah.
best popcorn in the conference. Right? We're getting ready, my first year of coaching, we're getting ready to announce the lineup, so our kids are clapping, getting ready. And the lady that's AD said, Coach, could you have your voice put for a second? I said, well, yeah, yes, ma'am, got to sign it. She goes, okay.
Welcome to tonight's game! So put over the lawyers!
She didn't have to, just yell. And the popcorn, we're sitting on the stage, so here, and the popcorn was right here.
Really?
Yeah, it was right behind us.
Did you ever get a copy of Kurt's book?
I never did.
Okay, because I've got one.
He was, promised me one, but,
Yeah, I've got one.
oh, that'd be awesome.
And,
In regards to the, what's